So far, all the items I have featured have some obvious connection to the railway. Carriages, engines, and even ashtrays could be easily connected to the rails. However, in the warehouse, there are items that you wouldn't think that would be connected to the history of the railway, and this simple box of lead pellets is one such item. Its tale, though, is one of deception, greed, deceit, and gold. Lots and lots of gold. In this box are the pellets used in the Great Gold Robbery. The year was 1855. Victoria reigned supreme and the Industrial Revolution was in full swing. The UK was revelling in its own profits and gold was the currency. As trade opened up among Commonwealth lines and the rest of the world, gold had to be transported between different countries and between different merchants, and these were transported in bullion bars. Due to the obvious security risk with transporting such a valuable cargo, the South Eastern Railway ran a specialist service. At 8:30 p.m. it would leave London Bridge Station and head to Folkestone, where a railway steamer would take it to northern France, and a further train journey to Paris completed the route. The bullion would be packed into wooden boxes that were bound with iron hoops, and a wax seal which bared the arms of the particular dealer in question was used to seal the case. The boxes were then weighed before they were loaded into specialist guards vans, which were fitted with railway safes provided by Chubb and Son. The safes were built to be 3 foot square and were made out of thin inch-thick steel with access to the safe from the lid. Each of the safes had 2 locks, but they all had the same set of keys which could work all of the safes. To again ensure security, copies of the keys were held separately, and the railway company ensured that no individual could hold 2 keys at the same time. The only time the 2 keys would ever be together is at its starting point and its destination. With so many precautions taken to protect the gold, only a fool would even consider trying to take on such an elaborate task of stealing it. However, in a pub in London, William Pierce, who was a former employee of the South Eastern Railway, had such a thought. He was a compulsive gambler and had recently been dismissed due to his unsavoury habits. He had insider knowledge of how the bullion was moved, and when it was moved, and what was used to protect it. After plotting the chain's movements and also realising he would have to obtain both keys, he contacted professional thief and safecracker Edward Agar. At first Agar turned him down, calling it impossible. But when Pierce told him he could get the keys, Agar became more confident and self-assured he could pull this off. Agar also had an ulterior motive. His partner Fanny had just given birth to his child, and he wanted to make sure that she was well looked after. Even though he lived in the upper-class area of Shepherd's Bush, he wanted to give Fanny and the child everything they needed. Pierce needed an inside knowledge from current workers of the railway, so he contacted James Burgess and William Tester. James worked at the important terminus of Folkestone, while William Tester worked in the traffic department at London Bridge Station. Not only did he know about the transportation of valuable goods, he also knew the guards' rotas. Both were only too happy to help in the plan, as the railway had recently docked their wages. The final person in the scheme was a gentleman called James Townsend Soward. He had a very reasonable, respectable job as a barrister, but led a double life. On one side, he dealt justice, but he also evaded it and was the head of a forgery gang. Agar and Pierce travelled to Folkestone to gain intelligence on the movements and processes involved at the end of the line. They concluded that one of the keys was carried by the superintendent of Folkestone, while the other was locked in the railway office at Folkestone Pier. In July 1854, by sheer stroke of luck, one of the keys that was held at Folkestone was lost, so the locks had to be reconditioned and brand new keys issued. By sheer chance, the clerk corresponding with the company was none other than Tester. Once the keys were reissued, Tester smuggled them out of the office briefly and took them to the pub. Agar made an impression of them in green wax. However, such was Tester's nervousness, he accidentally brought two identical keys, so Agar had to improvise. He sent £200 of gold sovereigns on the SER line and watched where the other key was stored. Once they discovered exactly where it was kept, Pierce went into the office, took the key, and made an impression of it while Agar was on lookout. Using the wax impressions, rough keys were made. When Burgess was on duty, he would use the keys until they worked perfectly. With the biggest obstacle of unlocking the safe solved, the only thing that was stopping them taking the gold was the weight. The weight problem they solved rather quickly. They obtained £220 of lead pellets. They put the pellets into carpet bags and specialist bags that could go under their cloaks, so they could conceal it as they boarded the train. All they needed was the gold. On the 15th of May 1855, Burgess gave the signal to Agar, who was waiting outside London Bridge Station, that a gold shipment was on the way. Tester made sure that Burgess was on board working the mail, and Agar and Pierce purchased 2 first-class tickets for the journey to Folkestone. They gave the carpet bags to Burgess to store in the guard's van, and Pierce took a seat in the cabin while Agar slipped unnoticed into the guard's van and hid in the corner covered by Burgess's overalls. As soon as the train was off, Agar came out from his hiding place and set to work. Soon he had the bullion boxes out of the safe, but he had another challenge. The bullion boxes were sealed with the wax seals and the locks from the merchants. Agar was ready for this. The boxes were sealed by the 2 iron bands that ran around the box, so Agar removed them. This allowed the box to be opened without having to use the key. He weighed the bullion and made sure the same weight of pellets went back in the box. Satisfied, he sealed it using the bands, and this once more with the wax seal, however, was destroyed, so he made a die and sealed the box using the seal he created. He hopes that the dim lighting of the station would conceal the 2 different seals and would not be noticed. By the train that had gone into Paris, they would be long gone. When the train stopped at Redhill, Agar once again hid after handing a few bags of gold to Tester. Tester then returned to the office in London to give himself an alibi. Pierce joined Agar in the guard's van, and once the train was on the way again, the thieves had more opportunity to examine more boxes. They found gold bars and American gold eagles, and once the job was done, they replaced the boxes in the safe and cleared away any mess that they had made. The lead shot was now replaced with gold bullion, which they strapped to the bags under their cloaks and in the carpet bags. They hid once again as Folkestone came into view and the boxes were removed by the staff. And knowing their plan was complete, Agar and Pierce made their way back to the first-class cabin, where they exited the train at Dover, collecting the carpet bags once again from the guard's van. They made their way back to London the next morning, after throwing the forged keys into the English Channel. All in all, the gang stole over 100 kilos of gold, which was valued at the time to be £12,000. Adjusted for inflation today, that would be over £280,000. The plan didn't quite work out as they hoped. An eagle-eyed French crew member spotted that the boxes seemed damaged, so they were weighed and found to be 40 pounds lighter than they had been in London, with other boxes weighing more. The boxes were rushed to Paris, where they were weighed again and hurriedly they were opened. Following day, a £300 reward was offered for information on the thieves. As for the gold itself, some of it ended up being pawned, in particular the gold eagles. The bullion bars would be harder to get rid of, so Pierce and Agar melted them down into smaller bars. By then, tensions had begun to show between the two men, and they accidentally set fire to the floor of the villa when one of the crucibles cracked. A good chunk of bullion was sold to Soward, who through his gangland dealings managed to launder the gold and split the profits between the four men. The four men revelled in their success and used their ill-gotten gains to buy bonds and shares and open betting shops. In the September, Agar was arrested following a fraud investigation involving his new lover Emily Campbell and her boss William Humphreys. Agar was tried and found guilty of fraud and was sentenced to penal transportation for the remainder of his life. Agar was terrified, but he arranged for £3,000, which was the remainder in his bank account, to be given to Pierce, with strict instructions that it was to support Fanny and their young child. Pierce agreed, but the money never got to Fanny. Due to his gambling habits, Pierce had run out of money, so the £3,000 was a godsend to him. Fanny was desperate and furious. She went to the head governor of Newgate Prison, and she told him that she knew who was involved in the great gold robbery in the hope she could claim the £300 reward. She explained about the fire that had taken place in the villa, and on inspection, the police found gold specks in the fireplace. Agar was interviewed at once, and at first he refused to answer anything, until he heard what had happened to the £3,000. Agar was furious, and was quick to give full details of the crime and its accomplices in a plea bargain. Pierce and Burgess were arrested on the 5th of November. Tester, who was now living in Sweden at the time, avoided capture, but he was told the police wanted to speak to him. Once Tester's employers had heard that the police were looking for him, he was dismissed and sent back to the UK. Tester, Burgess and Pierce all pleaded not guilty. Agar, who had accepted his fate, was only too happy to give evidence. Other witnesses were called, including the police, taverners and hotel keepers, and confirmed that all the men knew each other. They had the opportunity, the motive and the means, and it only took 10 minutes for the jury to find them all guilty. Burgess and Tester were both sentenced to penal transportation for 14 years, and the punishment was not only to reflect the robbery itself, but for the breach of trust that the railway had given them. Even though Pierce had orchestrated the robbery, he got a lighter sentence of 2 years hard labour with 3 months of solitary confinement. Looking at today, when many of us say the Great Train Robbery, we all think back to the 1960s when Ronnie Briggs and his gang famously stopped the train at Mentmore Bridge. However, this robbery will always hold the title of being the first.